You know what it looks like when someone spends their entire adult life using alcohol as a personality, as confidence, as a way to get people to like them? Well, my guest today lived that for years. He was a teacher showing up hungover, a guy who couldn't say no to a drink even if it meant someone might reject him, and a man who built an entire identity around a version of himself that only showed up after the third beer. But then he made a decision. And then he made another one. And now he's approaching 1,000 days alcohol free and living a life that looks nothing like the one he was performing before. Today, I'm sitting down with my friend Billy Lahr, an educator for over 20 years, turned coach, podcast host, and community builder. After stepping away from his role as Dean of Students, he spent several years traveling across 5 continents, an experience that reshaped how he thinks about work, identity, and what a meaningful life actually looks like today. Now he hosts the Mindful Midlife Crisis podcast and facilitates weekly conversation series where he guides professionals through midlife reinvention, sober curiosity, and adult gap year design. His goal is simple: helping people move through change with clarity, confidence, and intention. And this conversation is one of the most real, relatable, and honest ones that we've had yet to date on this show. So if you've ever used alcohol to fit in, to feel confident, or to become someone you thought people might like more, this episode is going to hit you right where it needs to. I can't wait for you to hear it. Let's get into it. Welcome to Beyond the Gray, the podcast about gray area drinking and how it impacts your health, relationships, purpose, and faith. This is where we have real conversations about the topics successful men over 50 don't usually talk about out loud. If you've built a great life but keep asking, is this it? You're not alone. When alcohol becomes your go-to off switch and your marriage, health, or purpose feel disconnected, you're in the right place. I'm your host, Kari, and this, my friend, is where the gray ends. Welcome back to Beyond the Gray. I'm your host, Kari, and today I can't even tell you how excited I am to have Billy Lahr on the show. He is the host of the Mindful Midlife Crisis podcast, as well as the newsletter and community. And today we are going to hear all about Billy's story and how he got to where he was and his drinking journey. So welcome to the show, Billy. We're so excited to have you. Thank you for coming on.
Absolutely. We've had some shenanigans here beforehand trying to get this all set up, and we've had a good laugh so far. So I'm in a very good mood. I'm always in a good mood to talk to you, Kari.
Oh, thank you. And even though it's morning for me as we record this and it's the evening time for you, we were 11 hours apart, I believe. Is that what it is?
13. Yeah,
13
I'm in Seoul,
hours
South
apart.
Korea. So yeah. So it's always interesting trying to coordinate times with people, but I always make time for you, Kari.
Oh, well, I appreciate that, Billy. Thank you. And just for some history and context, you had me on your show, gosh, about 4 years ago. It's been a while.
Yeah. That was episode 61, I think, where you talked about question the drink and living life in the gray. And it was a really fun episode. That was back when I was doing the podcast with my good friend Brian on the bass. So we had a really good conversation that day.
We did. We laughed and we carried on, but it was a good conversation exploring what Question the Drink. By the way, for those that don't know, Question the Drink was a program that I had and ran in a Facebook group. It is no longer, but the concept is still here. So it is really about questioning why you're drinking, questioning the drink. And we talked about that as well as my story with gray area drinking. But today we're going to talk about your story, Billy. So I want to start with all the way back when you were in your 20s. Can you give us an idea of what that was like for you in college and beyond your college years, what that looked like for you?
Yeah, so I grew up in a small town in Minnesota, and every Sunday after church, you'd go to the bar because that was the restaurant. That's where they served Sunday lunch, right? So, it's kind of one of those mentalities where if you're old enough to see over the bar, they would serve you a drink, that kind of thing. Now, we weren't really that type of family, but like my parents like to have fun, my sisters like to have fun, so I saw them drink. And I didn't really get into drinking too much when I was in high school because my high school baseball coach said, if you ever get caught drinking and you get suspended, you're done for life. You will never play baseball for me again. That terrified me. So I really didn't get into drinking until maybe around, I'd say like halfway through my freshman year. And then once I started getting into that, then that's sort of where this drinking personality started to take over. This drinking identity started to take over. And, this character emerged. And this character was loud. He was boisterous. He was obnoxious. And people either really loved that character, and as someone who, it feeds off of external validation, I fed into that. And of course, there were people who absolutely hated that character, but you ignored them because that was their problem. That wasn't my problem. That was their problem. And then when I started working as a teacher and money was coming in, then it was just, well, I've got money to burn on booze and I'm just going to get blackout drunk every single weekend. And then maybe a couple times a week I would go out to TGI Fridays or to Buffalo Wild Wings with my good friend Wes. And I can certainly remember times when I was hungover the next day trying to teach, and maybe I would sneak into the nurse's office because I was hungover during my prep period and needed a little bit of a rest. Yeah,
I want to ask a question. What grades were you teaching during that time?
Yeah, it was 9th and 11th grade.
Oh, goodness.
So I don't imagine that they were, oblivious to this. I'm sure they saw us. It was in Rochester, Minnesota. And Rochester's a big city, but it's not a huge city. So people saw us out and about. They saw us drinking. They saw us being fools. Wes was even louder and more obnoxious than I was. So we drew attention to ourselves, but we fed off of that attention. And there became kind of this, like I said, this character, which then became a people pleaser, or it became like something that like I had to play that role, that I was too afraid to just to be myself. There's that saying, get drunk and be somebody. And I remember a comedian saying, get drunk and be somebody else. There's no point in being the same a-hole the entire time. And that's sort of the mentality that I had was, I had such low self-esteem being person A. So then when I got drunk, I could be this alter ego.
Yeah. You know what they call that?
Ego was, yeah, go ahead.
They call that liquid courage. That's what they call that.
Well, and I don't even, to be honest, it wasn't even liquid courage. It was for me, liquid courage was going up to the beautiful woman at the end of the bar and saying something to her. That's where liquid courage benefited me. I didn't need much liquid courage to flip the switch. I think it was more like going from regular gasoline to premium gasoline. It was more along those lines. So like the obnoxious behavior was always there even when I was sober, and then when I was drunk it went from like Spinal Tap. We turned it up to 11.
Yes. That's very common for people, by the way, who drink quite a bit. You turn into something that you're not normally, and it gives you this falsehood of confidence. I use the word courage there, but it could feel like confidence. Or the flip side of that is you just don't care. You just don't care. I call that the flip it switch. You can call it whatever F it switch you want. I call it the flip it or forget it switch, but you can call it any switch you want. But that tends to happen a lot.
Yeah, that when I would flip that switch, I think the real reason for that was because I wanted to get a reaction out of people, and I wanted people to be like, "Oh my gosh, I can't believe he did that." And I would get egged on to do things, and then I would do those things because I wanted to be accepted. I wanted people to like me. And I think that's common in your 20s.
Absolutely. So when did you start questioning your relationship with alcohol? When did it start to become something that you were like, I probably ought to be paying attention to this?
Yeah, around 2012 is where I started to really struggle with my mental and emotional health. I was feeling rejected professionally and personally in my life, and that was manifesting into anxiety and depression and suicidal ideation. And I knew I needed to change something. And so I kind of took a look like, okay, what is causing this anxiety? And the two things that I realized were causing me the most anxiety was being around my students and alcohol. So I decided, you know what? I'm going to take a 180-day break because I'm an English teacher. I like symbolism. So 180 days meant that I was going to turn my life around 180 degrees. And I actually started to feel better. I was still struggling with my mental and emotional health, but then that's when around the time that I started going to therapy too. So that clarity in the sobriety and the mindfulness lessons, the mindfulness practices that I was using in therapy were helping me manage those anxiety attacks that I was having. I was still having them, but they were less intense. And when the 180 days were up, it was around April. So I was like, well, it's only 8 more weeks until the end of the school year. Why don't I just finish out the school year and without drinking? And so I did that. And then when the summer rolled around, that was 2013, I'm like, okay, I can go back to having a drink here and just I can do it socially. I can do it responsibly. I don't have to pound alcohol anymore because I know that I can go without it. And you kind of like lose the lust of alcohol if you take that kind of break. And I remember that summer I started dating somebody and I told her, listen, when this school year starts, I'm going to do this sober school year again because I think it was really good for me. And I remember her saying, does that mean I can't drink? And I'm like, no, I don't care. You can drink as much as you want. Just know that like I'm not going to drink. Don't pressure me to drink. This is just my thing now. And I did those sober school years from 2013 until 2021. And I really just credit it to helping me turn a corner with regards to my mental and emotional health.
I love, by the way, I want to say something really important here, Billy, is that I love how you told her that what you needed, that you were going to be doing this and not to pressure you and to support you, and you didn't care what she did. What a beautiful realization that you had for yourself and ownership in your decision. And that's a big lesson here that I really want the listeners to hear, is that you decided no matter what was going on or who was drinking around you, that this was going to be something that you were very serious about and wanted to be committed to. So I really commend you for that. So after this second school year, did this continue for a couple of years? Your sober
Yeah, so
school?
I did the sober school years from 2013 to 2021. And then in 2021, I took a leave and ended up resigning from my teaching job because I was traveling. So I went to Portugal for 2 months. I went to Spain for a while. I went to Dakar. I went to New York City and went and visited my sister in Seattle, Washington, took a road trip down to Portland. But all that time, I'm like, well, I'm not teaching. I'm not around students. I might as well have a couple drinks every now and then. And so, especially when I was in Portugal, the sun's shining. So that meant, hey, beer for lunch, beer for dinner, beer for the evening, right? That was just kind of the routine then. Though I wasn't getting drunk, I could feel myself, especially when I got back to the States, and especially when I got to my sister's, really feeling like, I don't know if I like this anymore. Like this is again starting to impact my mental health. I think I need to take a little bit of a break. And interestingly, that's when you were interviewed for our podcast. And I'm like, hey, it's February 1st. And like, I have OCD type tendencies. And I'm like, it's the first day of the month. I'm having this conversation with Kari, who is all about Question the Drink. I am going to take a pause on drinking. And I was going to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico in a week. So that meant going to Puerto Vallarta, Mexico for a month and not drinking. I was like, am I going to be able to do this? And it was easy. And it was easy because I had already trained myself for years and years and years during those sober school years.
And you didn't die.
No, I didn't. I did. And I actually had a really great time when I was in Puerto Vallarta. Like, trust me, there's enough to do in Puerto Vallarta without drinking.
Right.
And what's interesting is I remember taking this dinner cruise to some remote island, and they do, it's kind of like Mexican Cirque du Soleil. I can't remember what the name of it is off the top of my head. But this dinner cruise, it's free alcohol. So if there was ever a time for me to just be like, this is the one time I'll cut loose, it could have been that night, but I didn't. And maybe in hindsight, I didn't get my money's worth. A lot of people got their money's worth.
Yeah, and then they probably paid for it handsomely the next day. So
exactly. Yeah. And those are the things now that I just don't miss are the hangovers. Because even now, if I had 1 or 2 beers, I would be hungover the next day. I would have a headache the next day. And I'm a morning person. I want to be up. I want to be doing my things and taking care of business right when I wake up. So to wake up feeling sluggish and hungover and cloudy, that's just not how I want to start my day. And so being alcohol free has allowed me to wake up and just attack the day.
And that's exactly the way it should be, Billy. Honestly, that's a good thing. So where are you now? So you made this decision back in 22? It was in
So I did, but then, so this was, this was 2022, and I probably took like 4 months off, and then I went back into school mode. I'm like, okay, it's mid-June, and at this time I was in Seoul, South Korea for the first time. I'm going to go ahead and allow myself to have a drink here and there. But what it really comes down to is I was making those choices for myself. If I wanted to have a drink, I would allow myself to have a drink. Whereas for years and years and years, I was drinking because I was succumbing to the peer pressure, or I was succumbing to the need for external validation. But now I was taking over ownership. I was utilizing agency in that way. And I remember I just wanted the one Korean drinking experience. And trust me, Korea is a strong drinking culture here. It is a strong drinking culture. People do not understand that I don't drink. So I have my one wild night where I wanted to have somek, which is where you take soju and beer and you mix them together and you kind of drink it like a shot. So I had that wild night, and then the next day I went hiking up the mountain and I felt awful, and I'm like, all right, I don't really need to have this kind of night ever again in my life. So time passed, and again I was drinking intermittently. Not often, but here and there. And when I got back to the States in the summer of 2023, I told myself, I wonder how long I could go here without drinking. And so I was taking a bit of a pause, and that's when I started dating this woman. And
we already know where this is going to go.
and I think she was kind of iffy on me, and I was very into her. And on my birthday, she was like, well, let's go and have a drink. And the people pleaser kicked back in. I wanted this woman to like me. I knew that she was iffy on me. If I rejected her, then she was going to reject me. So we went and we had a drink. And then like a week later, she was like, you know what? I'm not interested in you anymore. And I was like, duh.
So you blew it. You blew it on this girl.
But the silver lining in that, though, is now I know what my 0 day is. Because my 0 day is my birthday, and day 1 of sobriety is the day after my birthday. And we're recording this on May 6th, which means I have been sober for 997 days. So my 1000th day is coming up here on May 9th.
Yes.
And it's a cool milestone to think about. And I the reason why I've been stayed sober this long, there's two reasons for it. One, this started as a challenge. I'd gone 9 months without drinking. I'd gone a school year without drinking. I wanted to see if I could go a full calendar year, a full 12 months without drinking. And once I hit that year, I was like, well, I don't really miss it. I don't really feel like drinking. So, can I go 2 years? And so now it's been nearly 1,000 days. And it's not to say that maybe someday when I'm 70 years old and I'm sitting on the patio watching the sunset and over the ocean, might I have a beer? I might. I'm 70. I've earned it. I might do it then. But the other reason why I continued this streak is because I remember watching the TV show House of Cards, and one of the characters in there is an alcoholic, and his motivation for not drinking is F the zero. And that instills a lot of pride, and it taps into that competitive nature. I don't want to go back to zero. I don't want to start over. So I'm very content with just moving forward without drinking. And the beauty is I don't get peer pressured
Right,
anymore
right.
to
Well,
drink.
a lot of things, I want to comment on a lot of things that you just said there. First and foremost, I totally get not going back to zero. So for most of my listeners know, I did attend AA when I quit drinking because there was no term gray area drinking that was in my orbit back in 2016. Although the term was there. Actually, I just recorded an episode that talks all about gray area drinking 101. And when I was in AA, for those that don't know, you get a white chip when you are on your first full day of being alcohol free. And if you admit that you did drink, you have to go back up for another white chip and to say that you're starting all over again. And I remember thinking to myself, sitting there in those rooms and the meetings going, there is no way I'm ever going to be picking up another white chip. One, because I am competitive like you. Second of all, I'm like, I didn't work this hard. Not that it was, well, in the beginning, it was, it's always a strain. And I didn't have the education or the awareness that I have now. I didn't understand the term gray area drinking, which is where I was. I was not an alcoholic. There was all these things. It was so much about my identity, which again, another episodes 3 and 11, I believe it is. I talk about the identity, and that's so important. So I understand the not wanting to go back, and 1,000 days is something to really be celebrated. So congratulations. And I'm very excited for you. The second thing that you said I want to point out is about when you're 70, you might say, I don't know, maybe I want to drink. And I want to really pause here because another one of my biggest pieces of advice for people is let's just focus on one intention at a time. And I like to look at every day as an intention. What is my intention for today? And when I first quit drinking, maybe you did this too, Billy, you were conscious of it. I'm choosing not to drink today. That's my intention. And my intention for tomorrow is to not drink. But past that, I don't know and I don't care. And that's how I lived the good portion of my first few years of sobriety. And that's what I teach to my clients and ask them to adopt that mindset. Because it's too big inside of our heads to think forever, forever, forever. The reality is, I don't think I would ever pick up a drink again. There's no reason for me to want to or need to, but I'm not going to commit to that and say that that would never happen, right? Who knows? But my intention today and tomorrow is to not drink. Past that, I don't know. So I love that you said that because I think it always gives us permission that we're still in control. We still have agency over our decisions. I think that's really important. So things have come full circle for you now. You're still in Seoul, Korea for a while. You also started something that I really want to share with the listeners about these conversational series that you've been doing. So tell me about that and how somebody might get involved if they'd like to.
Yeah. So I I've been trying to figure out what to do post education, and I still have this desire to help people. When I was teaching, my tool was English, right? That was my toolkit. And now my toolkit is hosting these weekly conversations, and the subject matter revolves around four different things. So, and there are four things that I've been navigating, I would say, the last 10 years. So the first one is called the Jumpstart Your Midlife series. And we focus on this formula that I have for finding purpose and finding passion, because I am not a believer in follow your passion. I think that is terrible advice. I think that is ridiculous. Passion is a byproduct of our curiosity plus our strengths and understanding that, and our community. When we add those three things together, we identify our purpose. So if we know what our strengths are, we use our strengths to follow our curiosity, and we use that curiosity to connect with others, we identify our purpose. But if we want to turn purpose into passion, then we need to multiply that by consistency, discipline, patience, and self-compassion. And we always hear people talking about discipline and consistency. Rarely do we have people talk about patience and self-compassion. And I think the self-compassion piece is the most important of that all. So that then is what leads us to passion. But again, passion is a byproduct of all of that. We shouldn't follow our passion. We should follow our curiosity. We should follow our strengths. That is what's going to lead us to our people. So that's one series of conversation. And another series that I'm hosting is called the Adult Gap Year, for people who want to take that gap year. A lot of high school students, after they graduate, they will take a gap year if they don't know whether or not they want to enter the workforce, or whether they want to go to college. As adults, hey, we might need a break, or just a reset after working decades in our profession, in the same profession. It's what I did. I took an adult gap year. I'm on my 5th adult gap year right now. So it's just kind of providing insight on how to navigate that, how to plan for that, and how to be aware of the emotions of that. Because you, as a gray area expert, those gray areas can become real dark if we aren't mindful and aware of the emotions that pop up as we're navigating these big cultural changes and lifestyle changes.
Absolutely.
And then the third one that I'm hosting is called the Sober Explorer. And it's where we have conversations like the one you and I are having. And I was very, very honored to have you attend one of the Sober Explorer conversations as well. So if people are interested in any of those series of conversations, they can go to www.mindfulmidlifecommunity.com and check out the conversation series there. But now I'm pivoting towards something brand new, which is called free writers. And I was introduced to this concept of free writing by a gentleman named Nate Johnson. And Nate Johnson is a Navy veteran and a former prosecuting attorney who was going into Minneapolis jails and doing these 5-minute free writes where they would choose a random word, like, for example, yellow. And then we'd set the timer for 5 minutes, and then you had to write on yellow. And the only rule was you couldn't stop writing. If you didn't know what to write, you would literally write, I don't know what to write, I don't know what to write, I don't know what to write, until something came to you. And what Nate found was that these guys who were in rival gangs and in the same prison with each other started bonding with each other and started seeing each other as more human and recognizing how much they have in common. And what was really serendipitous about this is I ran into Nate when I was in Chiang Mai, and he was just happened to be reading George Orwell's 1984, and me being a nerdy former English teacher, of course I had to say something to him, and I was like, hey man, that's a really great book. And we started talking about it, and I found out, oh, he's from Minnesota as well. And I'm from Minnesota. And so now we have this connection. He's from a small rural town. I'm from a small rural town. And so I asked him, what are you doing in Chiang Mai? He told me that he was in recovery. And it's so interesting how I just get connected to people who are in recovery one way or another.
It's not by accident, Billy. I believe we go nowhere by accident. So I think you were supposed to meet Nate. That's awesome.
Yeah. And Nate has been leading these sessions in Chiang Mai, and I asked him, hey, I'd like to bring this to more people. Are you cool with me doing this remotely? Are you cool with me kind of building a digital product around this? And he was like, oh yeah, that sounds great. So while Nate's recovering in Chiang Mai and leading it with his community that is growing day after day after day, I am now leading remote sessions via Zoom. And yesterday we had our first two groups, and it's really neat because being in Seoul, I have people from all around the world. One of the topics was the color yellow. And
you know what?
We just wrote about that.
I have to share with you. This is so crazy. I knew you told me about Nate. You told me about the free writing, and I replied back to you. This is on WhatsApp because that's how we communicate. And I said, oh my gosh, I know this exercise. I participate in this exercise. And what I didn't know about Nate, that he was a veteran in the Navy. And how I learned about this exercise is through my friend who passed last year, Chris. He died from brain cancer at 59. I actually just mentioned him in my newsletter. Chris, he shared this concept with us in a small group at church. And then what happened was they created a free writing group at church. It was separate from a small group. It was just called the writing group. And instead of 5 minutes, we did 10 minutes. And the same exact concept. We'd all put a random word, just one word, into a bucket. One person would draw it. We would be quiet ahead of time. We had about a 30-second quiet pause just to get our mind settled, avoiding the critic, avoiding any sort of judgment while you're writing, not to pick up your pen, and to write straight for 10 minutes. And we'd had a timer. And I agree with you. Some of the most incredible things happened in those sessions. One of them I'll never forget was the word leaf, L-E-A-F. I mean, my gosh, you wouldn't even believe where that one word, any of the words that we did, where it took us. It took us down paths that you didn't even know we're going to go down this path. People are bringing up old trauma, or they're bringing up something exciting that happened and joyful. And then afterwards, and I don't know if you do this, Billy, maybe just a clarification for me, is after somebody would read, we would ask them to read it again for a second time, because sometimes we hear things differently. And the person who's listening, the people who are listening that are in the room, the job isn't to critique them. The job isn't to say, wow, that was so good. You write so great. It was, when you mentioned X, Y, and Z, Billy, that really landed for me. Here's why. And it had this openness and the invitation to share what it meant for that listener to hear what you've written in a way that affected them. Or they might say, can you clarify what you meant more about that? I'd like to hear. And the conversations were so rich. So I applaud that you're doing this. I think this is one of the greatest exercises that you can do with other people. And it's okay if they're strangers, because it feels safer. And then you realize, like in all communities, even when I was on with your Sober Conversation series, I was the only one from America besides you, right? And yet those ladies that were on the call with us, I just fell in love with them. After being on a call with them for 1 hour, you just realize that we're all so much alike. We're more alike than we're not alike. And that is such a great invitation for us. I really appreciate you sharing that. Thank you so much. So Billy, I have one last question for you, and it is about the gray areas. And you know that we talk all about the gray areas here on this podcast and in my business. So if you had to say What is the one biggest gray area that you have noticed in all your wonderful years on this earth, which is younger than me, but we won't go there. What would you say is the number one hidden cost of somebody staying in a gray area? What do you think that danger is and what that gray area is for you?
So I think there's two. I think the first one that comes to mind is you risk living small. And you risk living a complacent life. There's too many people out there telling people to get out of your comfort zone. I disagree. Go ahead. You just hang out in your comfort zone. You worked really hard to feel this level of comfort. You sit there and you enjoy it. But when you start to feel complacent, and that's going to settle in and you're not going to realize that it's complacency. When that starts to settle in, then it's time to really take action. And I think being in a gray area is one of two things. It's either being complacent to the point where you don't know what you're doing, or what to do, excuse me, or you are operating from the reptile brain and you're constantly in survival mode. And that's what's causing you to be in the gray. Honestly, right now, I'm in a gray area. I don't know whether or not I'm going to stay in Seoul or if I'm going to go back to the United States. I've been in a gray area for quite a while now, ever since I left education. For the first 2 years when I was traveling, it was sunshines and rainbows. But the last 3 years have been really challenging as I try to figure out who am I and what do I have to offer and who do I have to offer to. So I think that's a hidden cost of living in the gray, is that you are living small and you're living complacent. And I think the other part of living in the gray is that you are giving up agency to take control of your own life. And part of that may be because you don't know exactly what to do. And that's okay if you don't know what to do. But then what are you doing in order to add color to your life to get out of that gray? Are you taking action or are you being complacent?
That is so good. That is so good. Billy, I have a resource on my website that I want to share, and maybe you want to consider thinking about doing it too. It's a gray area audit, and it's an invitation to look at the core 4 areas of our life to see where some of those gray areas are. And for the listeners, I'll put the link in the description. So if you, maybe that might help you through your gray areas. And of course, we could talk offline. I would love to share that with you more.
Appreciate it.
But Billy, I would love the listeners to know, where is the best way for people to find you and jump into these conversation series and the free writing exercise meeting groups that you're offering now?
Yeah. Give me a follow on Instagram. It's mindful_midlife_crisis. That's also the podcast. I'm not recording any new episodes, but there's over 120 something episodes. So start on episode 61 with Kari and then backtrack to episode 19. I think that I always tell people to start with episode 19 because I remember that being the first guest where we were like, oh, wow, we're a real podcast. So shout out to Dr. Yvette Erasmus for being such a stunning guest, an amazing guest. And we've had her on a couple times. So you can also connect with me on LinkedIn, Billy Lahr, Lahr. And you can join the Mindful Midlife community at www.mindfulmidlifecommunity.com. You're not going to see anything there about free writers, but just know that if you do sign up at that website, you will be invited to join the free writers community as well. So I would love to know who's listening to this podcast, who resonated with this podcast. Feel free to email me also at billy@mindfulmidlifecrisis.com. I love knowing what resonates with people. And you can even tell me that, I thought you were an idiot. A lot of people do. That's okay.
I don't think we have to worry about that. Yeah, no, you're wonderful. And I'll put all that information in the show notes. And Billy, thank you so much for coming on and for agreeing. You are officially my second guest. since this will be episode number 14, and we very much appreciate you being here and sharing your wisdom. So thank you. And thank you for listening, and we'll see you on the next episode. This is Life Beyond the Gray. See you soon.